Imagine stepping back in time, not into a silent, dusty museum, but into a place overflowing with life, laughter, and the lingering scent of last Tuesday's ale. Forget everything you thought you knew about a quiet night's rest, because medieval inns weren't just simple beds for weary travellers. They were vibrant, chaotic nerve centres where merchants sealed deals, vital news travelled from town to town, and yes, even the occasional political uprising found its very first spark. Get ready to discover the authentic, surprising truth of living in a real medieval inn. This is not just history, it's history whispered into dreams. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and leave a like and a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Now let's begin. The medieval inn, a bustling nexus of life and travel, offered a unique glimpse into the daily rhythms and realities of a bygone era. Far from the romanticized notions often portrayed, these establishments were vibrant, often chaotic, and profoundly practical spaces that served as vital arteries in the medieval world. This exploration delves into the authentic experience of residing within a medieval inn, from the first stirrings of dawn to the quiet descent of night, uncovering the sensory tapestry, social dynamics, and enduring resilience that defined these remarkable establishments. The medieval inn, often a prominent landmark, typically stood in the heart of a bustling town or city, or strategically positioned along a major trade route, serving as a crucial hub of activity. These were substantial structures designed to accommodate a diverse clientele and their needs. As the world outside remained cloaked in the deep shadows of pre-dawn, the inn, a large and imposing building, already hinted at the life stirring within its ancient walls. The innkeeper's day did not begin by choice, but rather by an awakening orchestrated by the inn itself. A gentle sneeze, a muffled groan, a sudden crash, and the unmistakable clatter of a chicken making its escape through the front door served as his morning alarm. This symphony of sounds immediately established the chaotic and unpredictable nature of his daily existence. He would open one eye, noting the lingering darkness, a sign that it was either too early or too late, for medieval timekeeping offered little in between. Slowly, as if peeling himself from a loaf of bread, he would sit up, rubbing the sleep from his face with a sleeve that, once linen, now bore the texture of a worn saddlebag. His bed, though simple, was not entirely uncomfortable. A straw mattress, slightly slanted, with a blanket that carried the faint, comforting scent of garlic and the lingering aroma of last Tuesday's ale. This simple comfort, akin to a slightly damp cloak, provided a realistic portrayal of medieval sleeping arrangements, where mattresses were commonly stuffed with straw, moss, rags, or corn husks, and supported by ropes that required regular tightening to prevent sagging. Dressing was a gradual affair, involving a tunic, trousers, and a belt located after a brief search, hanging on a peg alongside a spoon, a candle nub, and a forgotten sock, whose ownership was best left unquestioned before sunrise. Descending into the common room, an unsettling quiet often prevailed before the day's inevitable rush. Subtle signs of the previous night's revelry were scattered about: a tipped mug, a solitary boot near the hearth, and a man snoring confidently under a table, clearly a seasoned patron. The innkeeper navigated this scene with practiced care, stepping around the slumbering guest, understanding that waking patrons too early could lead to awkward sword-point discussions. His first task was to stoke the hearth with a practiced flick of the poker, aiming for warmth rather than a roaring blaze, as firewood was a precious and expensive commodity. The memory of a past attempt to cook a goose indoors, feathers and all, served as a cautionary tale against excessive fires, as he set a pot over the flames, ready to reheat whatever last night's stew had transformed into. The distant bray of a mule and the distinct clump of early travellers arriving signalled the true beginning of the day. He exhaled, acknowledging the inn's unglamorous but warm, busy, and, most importantly, personal nature. The immediate immersion into the inn's morning routine, with its distinct sounds, smells, and the innkeeper's resigned acceptance, immediately conveys a profound aspect of medieval communal living. The fluid boundaries between human, animal, and domestic space, evident in the chicken's escape and the lingering sense, were characteristic of the era. The innkeeper's unhurried, almost cyclical movements, and his pragmatic approach to the day underscore the relentless nature of his work, and the absence of modern conveniences or rigid schedules. This early portrayal grounds the narrative in a gritty yet calmly presented reality, setting the stage for an exploration of the inn as a dynamic and challenging environment that mirrored broader medieval societal norms. The innkeeper's actions upon waking, from peeling himself off a straw mattress to carefully conserving firewood, paint a clear picture of a character defined by practicality, frugality, and a deep understanding of his environment. His unspoken rule of avoiding questions before sunrise reveals a pragmatic approach to managing a diverse and potentially volatile clientele, prioritizing peace and order over curiosity. This is more than just a job. It is a way of life that demands constant vigilance and adaptation to survive and thrive. This emphasis on the innkeeper's resourcefulness highlights his role not merely as a businessman, but as a skilled manager of human nature and limited resources, establishing a tone of grounded realism for the narrative. The sensory details of the dawning inn further immerse the listener in this historical reality. The air, initially thick with the lingering, pungent scent of stale ale, garlic and wood smoke, would gradually begin to mingle with the promise of the day's first pottage. Sounds included the subtle creaks of the old building settling, the distant bray of a mule, and the distinct clump of early travellers arriving. Visually, the dim, murky light of pre-dawn slowly gave way to a faint grey as the sun considered its ascent, with shadows dancing from the hearth's glow. The rough texture of the innkeeper's worn sleeve and the cool air of the common room before the fire fully took hold completed this initial sensory experience, grounding the listener in the tactile reality of the medieval inn. Breakfast at a medieval inn was less a culinary delight and more a pragmatic negotiation between what was edible and what was legally defensible. The innkeeper would ladle a thick scoop of something into a pot over the hearth, a nameless concoction whose smell hovered somewhere between boiled oats and a wet boot that had been contemplating cabbage. This was pottage, a medieval staple, conceived more as a concept than a precise recipe. Yesterday's pottage, made with barley and turnips, would reappear, now softer, augmented by mysterious bits from a goose that had failed to escape the previous night. The preparation was simple. Add water, heat, and repeat, resulting in a dish akin to soup that had given up halfway. The bread, hard as a roof tile and equally chewable, was cut with meticulous care, primarily to avoid breaking another knife. Guests consumed it slowly, a process partly for digestion and partly to allow time for reflection on their life choices between bites. Accompanying the meal was breakfast beer, not merely a medieval cliché but a necessity. The water available was often questionable. Milk was reserved for the Lord's barn cat, and tea remained a distant twinkle in some far-off merchant's eye. The ale, though weak, possessed the crucial advantage of having been boiled and filtered through sheer desperation. Even children partook, albeit under supervision, upholding the establishment's reputation. This widespread consumption of ale, even by children, highlights a critical reality of medieval life, the pervasive lack of safe drinking water. Ale, being boiled during its production, offered a safer alternative, making it a health necessity rather than just a recreational beverage. This necessity also fostered social cohesion, as it was consumed communally, transforming a seemingly mundane detail into a crucial understanding of historical conditions. As the morning progressed, guests began to drift in one by one. A merchant, clutching his coin purse like a holy relic, sought his morning sustenance. A sleepy pilgrim, still clinging to his walking stick, muttered about blisters. And, inevitably, the bard would appear, requesting honey for his porridge, as if such a luxury were readily available and not locked away for weeks. These diverse figures, merchants, pilgrims, bards and monks, immediately established the inn as a vibrant social melting pot. Their varied behaviours and expectations, from the merchant's guardedness to the bard's audacious request, underscored the social stratification and the constant negotiation of space and service within the inn. This was not merely a place for rest, it was where different social strata, professions and regional identities intersected, exchanged information, and began their day. This dynamic interaction deepened the understanding of the inn's societal importance beyond basic hospitality positioning it as a vital node in the medieval economy and information network. Into this burgeoning scene stepped Marjorie, the barmaid, often regarded as the inn's very soul or functioning brain. Her age remained a mystery, perhaps 20, perhaps 30, or perhaps simply aged rapidly from prolonged exposure to travelling poets. What was certain was that without her, the entire operation would undoubtedly collapse into a stew-soaked heap. She moved through the burgeoning chaos with practiced precision, one hand expertly balancing a tray of mugs, the other swatting away a wandering hand that had misjudged her patience. Her reflexes were sharper than a ferret in a pantry. A drunken mercenary once attempted to compliment her ankles and awoke 2 days later to find his boots nailed to the ceiling. Marjorie possessed the remarkable ability to take an order in 4 dialects, pour ale without spilling a single drop, and insult a noble without technically committing treason. She was not rude, but supremely efficient, and in a building held together by splinters and half-promises, she was the sole possessor of true authority. She instinctively knew which travellers would pay in coin and which would attempt to barter with seashells. She could discern a fake accent, a stolen ring, and a flirtation disguised as a food complaint. Even the monk, who often mumbled about sin, understood that Marjorie was the patron saint of keeping things moving. Her day commenced before dawn and concluded long after the fire had dwindled to embers. In that time, she would serve countless bowls of stew, chase unruly children, bandage scraped knees, and somehow manage to refill every mug in the room, often while deftly dodging falling cutlery or diffusing an argument about the ownership of a goat that had wandered in during lunch. Yet, through it all, she never dropped her tray, a testament to her unique magic. Marjorie might not have officially run the inn, but in practice, it was undeniably her kingdom. The innkeeper might own the walls, but she commanded the floor, her subtle winks, sharp words, and milk-curdling stares forming a delicate dance performed daily with the grace born of years of low expectations and high tolerance. By the end of breakfast, the inn's air was thick with the mingled scents of smoke, barley, and ambition. Empty bowls clattered onto tables, stomachs were foolishly full, and spirits, though perhaps not soaring, were at least lukewarm. It was far from fine dining, yet it was hot, filling, and crucially, nobody had died yet, a triumph by medieval standards. The factual consolidation of this menu highlights the stark contrast between modern culinary variety and the limited, repetitive, and often unappetizing reality of medieval inn food. This contrast helps manage expectations for a sleep story that aims for historical accuracy. It also explains the necessity and resourcefulness behind such fare, where ale was consumed for safety due to questionable water, pottage provided sustenance, and waste was minimized through practices like reincorporating stew. This organized factual base supports the descriptive narrative, providing a clear, digestible summary of medieval inn fare. If a medieval inn had one constant, it was the continuous influx of people, and by mid-morning they would begin to pour in like pigeons with luggage, displaying a similar regard for personal hygiene. The morning's relative calm would give way to a vibrant, often chaotic scene. New arrivals included a self-proclaimed knight whose armour was mismatched, rusty, and held together by what appeared to be curtain rope. Yet he demanded a private room despite lacking coin, manners, and smelling distinctly of a horse that had lost a bet. Following him might be a merchant's apprentice, who spoke as if he owned a fleet of ships but attempted to pay for soup with buttons, haggling as if the establishment offered Groupon deals. Then, inevitably, another bard would appear, lute missing 6 strings, insisting his songs were worth more than gold they were not, and immediately launching into a mournful tune about lost love and goat theft, a performance no one had requested. A monk would shuffle in next, solemnly nodding and blessing the furniture, loudly insisting on fasting while conspicuously eyeing the bread, only to be found eating it 10 minutes later, explaining that technically it was not a sin if the loaf was already broken. These colourful figures, including merchants, pilgrims, knights and clerics, embody the diverse and often eccentric nature of medieval travellers. By noon, the inn transformed into a cacophony of clashing personalities and overlapping smells. The common room buzzed with activity, someone drying their socks near the hearth, another sharpening a knife for no discernible reason, a child running between tables pursued by a goose with a grudge, and two travellers arguing over the only stool without a wobble. Overseeing this vibrant chaos was the innkeeper, as calm as a monk on payday. He had witnessed it all before, knowing that by evening, someone would fall in love, someone would fall asleep in their soup, and someone, likely the bard, would challenge a stool to a duel. He would pour another mug, wipe the counter with a cloth that had seen better centuries, and exchange a silent nod with Marjorie, a mutual acknowledgement that, despite everything, the inn continued to function. The guests, though unpredictable, loud, and occasionally bleeding, were the very essence of the inn, and he would not have it any other way, save for perhaps a bit quieter and with fewer goose chases. Lunch at a medieval inn was less a structured meal and more a test of coordination, patience, and one's tolerance for noise that registered somewhere between a festival and a siege. It began deceptively innocently, the hearth warm, the stew bubbling, and Marjorie ringing the battered iron triangle to signal that food was ready. This brief moment of peace was immediately shattered by stampede-level chaos. Guests emerged from every conceivable corner, a trader leaping over a sleeping dog, a bard swinging his lute over his shoulder as if marching into battle, and two farmers arguing over who had sat down first, despite 6 empty benches and no one keeping score. The innkeeper continued to ladle out steaming bowls of pottage, a dish whose exact ingredients remained a mystery known only to the pot and perhaps divine beings. It was hearty, warm, and utterly flavourless, unless one considered turnip a flavour. One guest might inquire if it was vegetarian, another what vegetarian even meant, while the innkeeper would feign deafness. Bread was handed out with the ceremonial thunk of something recently used as a doorstop. Diners attempted to soften it by dipping it in their stew, often resulting in casualties to the bottoms of bowls. One enterprising man successfully traded his crust for a second helping of ale. Marjorie, the inn's indispensable backbone, wove through the chaos, her tray laden with mugs, her eyes fixed in that 1,000-yard stare familiar to battlefield nurses and women who had broken up 2 arguments about seating etiquette before noon. She dispensed food, offered smiles, and issued warnings all at once, a one-woman performance deserving of applause, though a full tip jar would suffice. Near the hearth, a pair of guards might engage in a burping contest, while a suspiciously cheerful monk hummed a hymn between mouthfuls. The goat, a persistent presence, would return, seemingly enjoying the company. Lunch typically lasted about an hour, measured by the sun, though time inside the inn was marked by how long it took for someone to spill ale, accuse another of cheating at dice, or attempt to sing with a mouthful of onion. When it concluded, a brief, eerie silence would descend, lasting only until someone dropped a spoon, signalling the beginning of the next cycle of noise and activity. The continuous influx of diverse travellers during mid-morning and lunch highlights the inn's critical role as a multifaceted hub. It was not merely a place for lodging and food. It functioned as a marketplace where merchants could exchange goods, act as deal brokers, and conduct business. The innkeeper's wealth and prominence, often extending to local government and banking, were directly tied to this economic function, indicating that inns were indeed big business and centres of trade. This expanded understanding of the inn's societal importance positions it as a vital node in the medieval economy and information network, facilitating commerce and communication across regions. The vivid portrayal of the inn's midday chaos, with its clashing personalities and overlapping smells, underscores the constant interplay of human nature within this confined space. The demanding knight, the haggling apprentice, the unsolicited bard, and the fasting monk are not just humorous caricatures. They represent the varied social statuses, expectations, and behaviours of medieval travellers. The innkeeper's calm demeanour in the face of this unpredictability and Marjorie's expert management demonstrate the immense social and managerial skills required to maintain order in a place often perceived as a cultural and political hotbed where political uprisings and mobs could even begin. This reveals the inn as a complex social environment demanding exceptional adaptability from its operators and offering a unique lens through which to observe the raw, unfiltered interactions of medieval people. The calm, factual presentation of these challenges reinforces the authenticity of the historical setting. Once lunch concluded, The stew consumed, the bread gnawed, and the goat once again escorted out with stern words and a broom. The part of the day most dreaded by innkeepers began, cleaning up after guests who had sworn they were meticulously tidy. To the untrained eye, the dining room might appear merely in mild disarray, but to Marjorie and the innkeeper, it was a full-blown archaeological dig site. It was replete with mysterious stains, lost personal items, and a deeply unsettling quantity of onion peels in places where onions should never have been. The wooden tables were wiped down with a cloth that, much like the innkeeper himself, had seen too much. It did not so much clean as smear everything into a uniform medieval glaze. Floors were swept, primarily by pushing debris under benches and trusting gravity to handle the rest. A boot, unclaimed by anyone, would be discovered under a stool and added to the growing pile behind the bar, optimistically labelled, "Possibly belongs to someone." Marjorie collected dishes with the speed and precision of someone who had performed this task daily for a decade and yearned for it to cease. Lingering guests would receive the look, a glance so potent it once compelled a noble to apologise and tip an entire silver coin, though he was never seen again, the story remaining a legend. The stew pot was scraped clean, its remnants either fed to the pigs or quietly reincorporated into tomorrow's recipe, a testament to the waste not, want not philosophy, especially when no one could discern the difference after the third bowl. The innkeeper might mutter about washing the mugs, but it was an open secret that he would merely rinse them in the rain barrel and declare it divine purification, the soaking bucket having become largely ceremonial. As the final crumbs were brushed away and the benches, somehow always wobblier than before, were returned to their places, the room began to resemble an inn once more. Rather than the aftermath of a particularly well-fed riot, Marjorie would take a brief breath, straighten her apron, and brace herself for the next wave, for in a medieval inn, peace was never permanent. It was merely the brief pause between one mess and the next, and somewhere, someone was already inquiring about supper. Beyond serving food and providing lodging, the innkeeper held a significant and multifaceted role. They were often wealthy and influential figures within their communities, sometimes involved in local government and even acting as banking agents. Their daily tasks encompassed managing the entire establishment, which included ordering supplies, meticulously calculating bookings, and, crucially, providing security in an atmosphere that could, at times, become rather violent. Innkeepers were expected to receive and entertain strangers daily. For inns strategically located on major trade routes, the innkeeper's responsibilities expanded considerably. They managed the storage and onward transport of goods, effectively acting as agents for merchants. This involved weighing goods, breaking down bulk cargo, arranging for carriers with carts or pack animals, paying them up front for their services, and navigating the complexities of tolls and taxes with officials. Innkeepers in port towns would even store goods for extended periods while awaiting ships travelling in the correct direction. This demanding role required significant financial backing and considerable logistical skill, underscoring that many successful innkeepers in this capacity were not merely humble barkeeps but individuals who had already accumulated wealth from other ventures, sometimes even priests, lawyers, or nobles. Marjorie, the barmaid, was undeniably the inn's unsung backbone, its soul or functioning brain. Her day began before dawn and stretched long past when the fire had burned low. Her diverse tasks were a constant ballet of efficiency, serving stew, chasing children, bandaging scraped knees, and tirelessly refilling mugs, all while deftly dodging falling cutlery or calming heated arguments. Her remarkable ability to never drop her tray was considered the magic of it. She commanded the common room floor using a subtle wink, a sharp word, or a stare that could curdle milk, demonstrating her practical authority in a building that seemed held together by splinters and half-promises. Her keen perception allowed her to discern which travellers would pay in coin versus those who would attempt to barter with seashells, and she could effortlessly detect a fake accent, a stolen ring, or a flirtation disguised as a food complaint. The inn's cleaning and waste practices, scraping stew pots, reincorporating leftovers, rinsing mugs in rain barrels, and sweeping dirt under benches, were not merely signs of poor hygiene by modern standards. Instead, they reflected a deeply ingrained medieval ethos of resourcefulness and a practical, almost circular economy. In a world without modern sanitation or abundant resources, every scrap held value. Leftover food became pig feed or tomorrow's pottage. This pragmatic approach minimized waste out of necessity, transforming what might seem like disarray into a functional system. This provides a deeper understanding of medieval daily life, highlighting the ingenuity and survival strategies employed in a pre-industrial society, reframing seemingly unhygienic practices as logical adaptations to resource scarcity. The innkeeper and Marjorie, far from being mere proprietors, were crucial facilitators of commerce, communication, and social order in a transient environment. The research reveals the innkeeper as a wealthy and influential man, often involved in local government and trade. Similarly, Marjorie, the barmaid, is described as the soul of the inn, possessing actual authority and managing chaos with practiced precision. Her ability to navigate complex social interactions and financial dealings, knowing who pays in coin versus seashells, underscores her indispensable role. This highlights the significant, often underestimated, social and economic power wielded by innkeepers and their key staff, challenging simplistic portrayals and emphasizing the complex, demanding nature of their daily lives, which were central to the functioning of medieval society. Waste management in medieval inns adhered to general medieval practices. Designated dumping areas were common, and refuse was often disposed of in rivers, though this contributed to pollution. Domestic composting was practiced, and food remnants were routinely fed to animals, serving the dual purpose of waste reduction and animal sustenance. Non-decomposable waste, such as wood, was burned, while old or worn-out household items were often buried within compounds. The chamber pot, a ubiquitous fixture in rooms, was a communal responsibility and frequently full, its presence discreetly hidden behind a curtain that fooled no one. While public bathhouses existed in towns, offering a social bathing experience, daily full bathing was not universal. Instead, top and tail washing face, underarms, nether regions was a common daily practice. Combs were essential tools for hair care and parasite removal, and clothing, particularly linen undergarments, was regularly changed to maintain hygiene. Just as the last bowl was stacked and the final spoon dried, and Marjorie dared to take a peaceful sip of leftover ale, it would happen. The door would creak open, ushering in new guests, fresh faces, fresh problems, and worst of all, questions. The first traveller might step in, cloaked in an oversized garment, a beard so dense it could house several woodland creatures, and an expression suggesting he was about to pen a scathing review on parchment. He would approach the bar and inquire, "Do you serve almond milk?" The silence that followed would be immediate and absolute, a collective judgment so heavy it might cause a stool to creak in the corner. Behind him, a young couple, clearly unmarried by their determined avoidance of physical contact, would ask to see the room first. Marjorie's response would be a simple point upstairs. "It's wooden. It has walls. It doesn't leak in summer." Usually. A third guest, covered in dust and self-importance, would insist on knowing the inn's candle source, whether the stew was ethically prepared, and if the goat had been trained to remain outside. The goat, of course, would choose that exact moment to enter and promptly sneeze on his boots. Then another bard, a different one this time, would attempt to pay with a song, plucking 3 wrong notes before launching into a ballad about a lady in a leaky chamber pot, only to be politely, yet firmly, asked to stop with a broom. The innkeeper would nod his way through every request, complaint, and mispronounced inquiry about wine varieties, knowing there was only one, and it was reddish. He would not argue or correct, simply listen, smile, and leave Marjorie to handle the travellers with their opinions, for they never arrived quietly. The humorous requests from these new guests, asking for almond milk, wanting to see the room first, or inquiring about ethically prepared stew, reveal a timeless human tendency to seek familiar comforts and standards even in vastly different environments. These questions, while anachronistic in a medieval context, highlight a universal desire for quality, privacy, and personal preference that transcends historical periods. The innkeeper's resigned acceptance of these opinions underscores the constant negotiation between guest expectations and the inn's practical realities. This connection of the medieval experience to contemporary human nature makes the historical setting more relatable, emphasizing the enduring aspects of travel and hospitality, even in its most basic forms, and adding a layer of gentle humour suitable for a sleep story. The inn itself was a rather large building, prominent in a town's landscape. Its basic layout was functional and comprehensive, typically including a main hall that served as the common room, a kitchen, stables for travellers' horses and other animals, a storage cellar sometimes equipped with strong boxes for valuables, a chamber which served as the toilet area and separate accommodation for the innkeeper's family. Over time, the accommodation evolved from simple communal straw beds in back common rooms to the increasing popularity of private rooms, especially in larger city inns or coach inns catering to wealthier clientele. By the 1400s, some inns even featured 1 or 2 private function rooms that could be hired for local guild meetings or private events. The primary construction materials for medieval buildings, including inns, were often sourced locally, timber especially oak, elm, chestnut and willow, stone and brick. Timber-framed walls were common, often filled with wattle and daub, a woven lattice of wooden strips daubed with a sticky mixture of wet soil, clay, sand, animal dung and straw. Ore plaster. Stone quarrying became more widespread later in the period, contributing to more stone-built structures. The appearance of the inn would reflect these materials: exposed wooden beams, rough stone walls, and a sturdy, functional construction. The furnishings within a medieval inn were typically simple, sturdy, and designed for functionality rather than comfort. They were characterized by dark oak, heavy shapes and carvings, rough joinery, and solid wood. Common pieces included refectory tables, benches, and stools, all built for communal use and durability. Guest rooms would feature simple wooden bed frames, often stuffed with straw or corn husks and covered with wool blankets. Other basic amenities might include a chest for storing belongings, a chamber pot for personal needs, and candles to provide light in the dim interiors. The detailed descriptions of the inn's architecture, its large, prominent size, its timber-framed construction with wattle and daub or stone, and its heavy dark oak furnishings highlight a pervasive medieval design philosophy. Practicality and durability prioritized over modern aesthetic comforts. The use of locally available materials and rough joinery reflects the technological capabilities and economic realities of the time. The inn was built to last and to serve multiple functions: lodging, dining, storage, and a trade hub, making it a physical embodiment of medieval ingenuity in construction and resource management. This provides a tangible, grounded sense of the inn's physical reality, helping the listener to truly live within its walls. It also subtly reinforces the challenges of maintaining such a structure in an era without modern building techniques or insurance. By sundown, the common room would become a patchwork of personalities: the quiet scribe in the corner, the arguing merchants near the fire, the bard on his second attempt at winning affection through sheer volume, and the goat, now comfortably asleep under table 3. The innkeeper would exhale, knowing that another batch of guests meant another round of small disasters waiting to unfold, and that each of them somehow believed themselves to be the normal ones. Supper time arrived not with elegance, but with a crescendo of noise. Chairs scraped across the floor, mugs clinked together, and someone would cough theatrically, hinting that they had been waiting for ages, despite having arrived only 9 minutes prior and still wearing their travelling cloak like a crown. Marjorie would emerge from the kitchen, holding a pot that was technically still warm and definitely still stew. The day's menu remained unchanged. It was the inn's signature dish, whatever was left from earlier, slightly reheated. It was served with a chunk of bread that could double as a blunt weapon and a side of unsolicited commentary from the guests. One traveller might voice suspicion: "This stew tastes different than last night," only for Marjorie to reply, without looking up, "It's the same stew," prompting a quick, fearful retraction regarding cutlery privileges. The bard, still present somehow, would offer to perform a song in honour of the meal, getting through one verse before Marjorie placed a ladle in his bowl, with a little more enthusiasm than strictly necessary, a clear message received. Near the hearth, 2 merchants might engage in a lively debate about grain prices, somehow louder than the couple arguing about the number of fleas they had counted on the bed upstairs. The goat, ever present, would return to its spot under the table, being quietly fed by a child who insisted it was his emotional livestock. The stew was filling, and the ale flowed freely, which certainly aided in the stew's filling qualities. Despite the occasional complaint about texture, temperature, or the existential ambiguity of the meat, everyone ate. The innkeeper would stand behind the counter, polishing a mug that had not been truly clean since the last harvest, watching his patrons with the resigned expression of a man who had accepted his fate. He knew that in about an hour, someone would spill something, someone else would fall asleep mid-sentence, and the bard would, inevitably, try again. But for now, the room was loud, messy, and very much alive, which, if nothing else, was a sign of success. In a medieval inn, supper did not need to be good, it simply needed to arrive without catching fire. Dining in medieval inns was a profoundly communal experience. Guests often shared soup bowls, and personal cutlery was a rarity. Most patrons carried their own knife, eating primarily with their right hand. Hand-washing before and after meals was a significant custom, reflecting a basic, albeit evolving, understanding of hygiene. Table etiquette, though simple by modern standards, was observed. Elbows were not to be rested on the table, hands were to remain quietly in the lap during pauses, and slurping soup was forbidden. Dipping bread into soup was a common practice, but required skill and restraint. These rules, though seemingly minor, served as subtle markers of social differentiation. As the last spoon clinked against the bottom of a bowl, and guests began to lean back with the satisfied groans of those who had survived another round of stew, the real show would begin. Evening entertainment, loosely defined. There was no scheduled program, no printed flyers, no host with a lute and a timetable. The evening simply unfolded, much like all great performances, with no discernible structure, limited talent, and a strong possibility of mild injury. The bard, of course, would seize the moment, clearing his throat dramatically, plucking 3 uncertain strings, and announcing a ballad titled "The Fair Lady of Festerwell Who Married a Troll." Half the room would cheer, the other half groan, and the goat would sneeze. His voice, though enthusiastic, would occasionally rhyme. The innkeeper would pour himself a mug of ale and drink deeply, as a man does when he knows there are still 6 verses to go, and at least one of them will involve sock theft. Meanwhile, at a far table, 2 old friends might attempt to outdo each other in a slurred riddle contest, the rules of which remained unclear, one of the riddles possibly being a recipe. A nearby monk would politely cover his ears and begin humming psalms at a volume typically reserved for church bells. Then, the dice would emerge, wooden, chipped, and possibly blessed or cursed, opinions varying wildly. A small crowd would gather as bets were made, using coins, buttons, a very old pair, and, on one occasion, a man's left shoe, its value undisputed. Dice games were a popular pastime, with common variants including Pass Dix, Hazard, and Zara. Card games also gained popularity as the Middle Ages progressed. Marjorie would circle the room like a falcon with excellent hearing, ever watchful for trouble, spilled ale, or anyone contemplating standing on a table. She might catch the bard mid-step as he attempted a dramatic gesture on a bench leg, clearly not designed for theatrical performances. In a quiet corner, a shy traveller might timidly produce a flute, producing 3 lovely notes before the goat head-butted him, drawing applause from all around. Evening entertainment at the inn was unpolished, unrehearsed, and in some towns, perhaps not entirely legal, but it was undeniably real, loud, and almost always concluded with someone snoring into their mug or waking up with a new tattoo drawn in soot. Supper and evening entertainment were not merely about feeding and amusing guests, they transformed the inn into a vibrant social and informational hub. The loud overlapping noise of debates, arguments, and unsolicited performances demonstrated the inn's critical role as a primary site for communication, gossip, and the exchange of news and ideas. In a pre-mass media age, inns were indeed cultural and political hotbeds, where information travelled and opinions were formed. Gambling also served as a significant social activity and a means of economic exchange. This highlights the inn's critical function in medieval society, where face-to-face interaction was paramount for social cohesion, business, and even political discourse, reinforcing that the inn was far more than just a place to sleep, but a dynamic, living entity. The detailed sensory descriptions of supper and entertainment, the cacophony of sounds, the pervasive smells, the unpredictable actions of guests, immerse the listener in a bustling, often overwhelming environment. Yet, the narrative consistently portrays this not as a problem, but as the accepted norm. The innkeeper's calm observation and Marjorie's expert management indicate a form of controlled chaos that was inherent to medieval communal living. The repeated, almost sentient, presence of the goat further emphasises this unique, slightly absurd, but ultimately characteristic atmosphere. This suggests that medieval people had a much higher tolerance for noise, lack of privacy, and general disorder than modern individuals. It allows for a calm narration of potentially jarring elements, fitting the sleep story format by framing them as accepted historical realities rather than exceptional discomforts, adhering to YouTube's educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic EDESA guidelines. There was no official closing time at the inn, no bell, no lights out announcement, and certainly no polite usher guiding guests toward the door. Instead, closing time was more of a gradual societal collapse. It began when the bard finally lost his audience, usually when he forgot the lyrics to the final verse and resorted to dramatic throat noises. Someone might throw a crust of bread in appreciation, though it was unclear if it was applause or a bribe to cease. Next, a few patrons would begin to slump, not necessarily from ale, but from sheer caloric weight, the stew having settled and gravity having won. One merchant might lean so far back on his stool that he effectively became furniture, his companion using him as a footrest. Marjorie would begin stacking empty mugs like she was constructing a small fortress, saying little but raising one eyebrow, which, in the language of innkeeping, meant wrap it up or start sweeping. There was always one guest who insisted on ordering something after the hearth had gone dark. Tonight, it was a peddler who believed a light snack meant a full roast duck, and was given bread, a stern look, and a firm suggestion to chew slowly and sleep sooner. The goat, ever present, would curl up by the dying embers. Though technically not allowed indoors, at this point, it had paid more attention during story hour than half the humans, so exceptions were made. The innkeeper would begin his rounds, poking at the dying fire, checking that no one had passed out face down in the stew pot again, and gently nudging a snoring traveller off a table and onto a bench, a professional move honed through years of subtle repositioning. One couple would head upstairs, bumping into every visible surface, and would, by morning, inevitably complain about the noise, the irony of which was noted and filed away for later passive-aggressive amusement. Eventually, the common room would empty, not all at once, but in soft, wobbly waves, like a tide of cloaks, yawns, and the occasional hiccup. The chatter would fade, the laughter die down, and the inn would grow quiet, or at least quieter. A mug might roll off her table, someone upstairs might drop a boot, and the goat would sigh deeply. But for now, the worst of the day was over. The guests were asleep, or at least horizontal and no longer speaking. Climbing the stairs in a medieval inn was an act of faith, not spiritual, but structural. The steps would creak, groan, and occasionally shift underfoot, as if contemplating early retirement. But for the weary traveller, upstairs meant one thing: a place to collapse. Rooms varied. Some were private, if one was wealthy or convincingly loud about it. Most, however, were shared dormitory-style arrangements where strangers slept mere inches apart, and everyone pretended not to hear anything. The beds consisted of wooden frames, typically stuffed with straw, moss, rags, or corn husks. Blankets were provided if one was lucky, and pillows only if brought personally or creatively fashioned from a cloak. The straw rustled constantly, sometimes because it was dry, and sometimes because something else inside it was also attempting to sleep. The ropes supporting the mattresses often needed frequent tightening to prevent sagging, hence the expression sleep tight. Snoring was an inevitable, dominant sound, layered, textured, and deeply unmusical. One guest might snore in short bursts like a hiccuping squirrel, while another aimed for volume, vibrating the rafters with every exhale, creating a veritable symphony of sleep apnea. Someone might talk in their sleep, mostly about carrots, while another whispered, "No, my lord," in a tone suggesting either a bad dream or a romantic misunderstanding. A boot might fall with a thud onto the floor, yet nobody would move, not even the goat, now snuggled beneath someone's cloak as if it owned the place. Bed frames would creak in protest every time someone rolled over, a frequent occurrence as straw mattresses were not renowned for their ergonomic support. Indeed, if one was not stabbed by a twig in the first 5 minutes, the bed was likely considered haunted. Privacy, as a concept, simply did not exist. One could pull a cloak over one's head, but that only muffled the sounds of someone in the next bed loudly discussing dreams involving fish and taxes. Someone else might repeatedly get up to check on the stew, which was merely code for needing the chamber pot, located discreetly behind a curtain that fooled no one. Speaking of which, the chamber pot was always there, always full, and always everyone's problem. It might even serve as someone's footrest until they realised their mistake too late. Occasionally, someone would stumble in after dark, unsure of which bed was theirs, and prepared to argue about it. Such arguments were brief, muffled by exhaustion, and typically settled by whoever possessed the larger boots or stronger odour. The pervasive lack of privacy was a defining feature of medieval life. The detailed descriptions of shared sleeping arrangements, strangers sleeping mere inches apart, the symphony of snoring, sleep-talking, and the constant use of a communal chamber pot underscore that privacy, as understood today, was virtually non-existent. This communal living was not merely an economic necessity for travellers, it was a fundamental social norm, extending even to noble households. The continuous sounds and smells were an unavoidable part of this reality, highlighting a vastly different historical expectation of personal space and rest. This provides a crucial understanding of the fundamental differences between medieval and modern living, explaining why sleep in an inn was a profoundly different experience. It allows for a calm, factual presentation of details that might otherwise be considered uncomfortable for a sleep story, by framing them as accepted historical realities rather than sensationalized discomforts, adhering to YouTube's content guidelines for educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic either-say content. The constant, subtle battle against pests and environmental discomforts was another inescapable reality. The explicit mentions of lice, fleas, and bedbugs, along with the suspicious straw, reveal that these pests were an inherent and unavoidable part of medieval inn life. This connects to broader medieval hygiene practices and the limited understanding of disease transmission, where pests were believed to spontaneously generate from dirt. Attempts at pest control, such as using smoke and fire, were often ineffective, leading to persistent discomforts like itchy bites. Coupled with the robust smells and fluctuating temperatures from many bodies in one room, the overall environment was one of constant, low-level physical challenge. This provides a deeper layer of historical accuracy, explaining the underlying health challenges and pervasive discomforts that guests would have experienced. By presenting these details factually and calmly, focusing on the historical context and the sensory experience rather than sensationalism, the narrative remains suitable for a sleep story, fulfilling the user's requirements for factual, yet soothing content. Despite the noises, the smells, the suspicious straw, and the shared air, there was something oddly comforting about it all. A dozen people, all from different places, sleeping under the same crooked beams, snoring in harmony. Upstairs was not peaceful, but it was safe, warmish, and, with luck, mostly free of goats, which at this hour of night counted as luxury. It was late. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. The common room was finally still, save for the occasional creak, the kind that made one wonder if the building was settling, or if something alive was navigating the beams. Either way, it was time for the innkeeper's midnight patrol. This ritual, though unwritten, was known to every innkeeper, involving a candle, an exhausted sigh, and a silent prayer that no one had died, started a fire, or sleepwalked into the pantry again. The tour began downstairs, benches mostly empty, mugs half drunk or half spilled, possibly fermenting into something new. A spoon floated in the ale barrel, its presence a mystery the innkeeper chose not to unravel. He checked the doors, front and back, both presumably bolted. Perhaps the front one had a tendency to swing open during high winds or emotional conversations, so he propped a bucket in front of it, just in case. Behind the counter, he counted the day's coins. Most real currency, some buttons, carved bones, and once again, that same old pair, which he placed in the undecided value bowl. Next stop upstairs. He tiptoed like a man sneaking through a nest of mildly drunk wolves, each floorboard betraying him with a creak louder than the last. Behind one door, someone snored with conviction. Behind another, someone mumbled about taxes in their sleep. He peeked into the shared room, a sea of limbs and cloaks. One guest was sleeping upside down, another tucked under the bed like a human storage box. The chamber pot was full, as always. Then came the peculiar part of the patrol. Things that should not be moving. A broom had fallen over again. The candle flickered despite no draught. He heard the unmistakable sound of a lute string being plucked, even though the bard had gone to bed 2 hours ago, or was tied to the wagon outside, depending on who one asked. And, of course, the goat was missing again. The innkeeper exhaled. Everything was, by this inn's standards, fine. He descended the stairs, blew out the candle, and muttered, "If anything catches fire, let it be the bad stew." It was the middle of the night, and technically everyone was asleep, but rest was elusive. The shared upstairs room hummed like a beehive of human discomfort. Snoring was the dominant sound, layered, textured, and deeply unmusical. One guest snored in short bursts like a hiccuping squirrel. Another aimed for sheer volume, vibrating the rafters with every exhale, creating a symphony of sleep apnea. Someone talked in their sleep, mostly about carrots. Another kept whispering, "No, my lord," in a tone suggesting either a bad dream or a romantic misunderstanding. A boot fell with a thud onto the floor, but nobody moved, not even the goat, now snuggled beneath someone's cloak as if it owned the place. The bed frames creaked in protest every time someone rolled over, a frequent occurrence as straw mattresses were not known for their ergonomic support. Indeed, if one was not stabbed by a twig in the first 5 minutes, the bed was likely haunted. Then there was the heat. With so many bodies in one room, the temperature would climb to that of a barn in summer. Cloaks were shed, blankets kicked off, and someone might decide to open the shuttered window, immediately letting in a breeze and the local owl, who would then refuse to leave. The smell was what one might politely call robust. A fragrant blend of stew digestion, unwashed socks, warm goat, and the vague ghost of ale. It would have been unbearable if everyone were not already too tired to care. Occasionally, someone would wake up convinced it was morning, only to find it was just darker than before, and now there was an owl watching. They would stumble out of bed, step on someone's hand, and be shushed back into place with a grunt. Marjorie slept in the back room, her ears attuned to pick up anything alarming, raised voices, sudden crashes, or lute music after hours. So far, so good. Mostly. And downstairs, the innkeeper snoozed behind the bar in a chair shaped exactly like his spine, holding a mug he had not finished. He dreamed of silence, a dream that would not be realized. In a medieval inn, sleep came in short shifts, shared spaces, and suspicious warmth, but still, everyone was horizontal, which was considered a victory. At the first hint of light, that faint, murky grey that could be dawn or merely an optimistic moon, the inn would begin to stir. It was not a graceful awakening, but more akin to a barn full of animals realizing someone had forgotten to lock the door. Feet would hit the floor with varying degrees of commitment. Someone would groan dramatically, as if waking up was an unexpected and entirely unfair imposition. Another guest would immediately begin a frantic search for a missing boot, which, unbeknownst to them, rested on the hearth, its journey there a secret known only to the goat, who remained silent. The shared room would empty in waves. Early risers, merchants, monks, and anyone burdened by a guilty conscience would creep out first, leaving behind a mess of wrinkled blankets, muddy footprints, and one still sleeping traveller who insisted, even in dreams, that he had not touched the cheese. Downstairs, the innkeeper would already be awake. Technically, his eyes would be open, his body upright, but his soul would still be halfway between this world and wherever old barkeepers went in their dreams, somewhere with clean mugs and quiet guests. Marjorie would arrive moments later, wrapped in a shawl and sheer determination. immediately commencing her silent inventory of overnight damage, two overturned stools, one missing candle, and someone had inexplicably put jam on the broom handle. Questions would begin immediately. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I pay last night? Is this my goat? To each, Marjorie would offer the same response, a slow blink followed by a flat maybe. Then would come the loud denials. I didn't spill that ale. I wasn't the one snoring. I never said that about the monk's sandals, even when confronted with direct evidence, such as a ladle stuck in someone's belt or a half-eaten turnip in their boot. The bard would reappear, bleary-eyed, declaring he had written a new verse about the night's events, and would be promptly offered a bowl of porridge and told to eat quietly, complying for once. Breakfast would be served, the stew reheated, ale poured, and life would continue. By the time the sun fully rose, most guests would have either paid or bartered their way out. Some would leave sheepishly, others striding off proudly, convinced of their own charm. But one truth remained unspoken. Nobody ever admits what happened after supper. The guests having trickled out, the goat having been escorted out once more, Marjorie would be found scraping something unidentifiable off a bench with the focus of a surgeon and the face of a woman reconsidering every life choice that had led her here. The common room would be quiet now, not peaceful, but merely taking a breath. A few embers would crackle in the hearth, the floor would be sticky, and one bench would list slightly to the left, either from misuse or protest. The innkeeper would stand behind the counter, cradling a mug of the morning's first ale like a family heirloom, gazing across the room and muttering the same thing he muttered every morning. Well, that wasn't too bad. It was, of course, but optimism aided digestion. Marjorie would walk past with a tray of used spoons, a frayed cloth, and the look of someone who would not be answering questions before sunrise tomorrow. She would refill the stew pot with water, salt, and faith, and begin stirring. Breakfast would happen, as always. Outside, a cart would rattle by, a rooster would announce its existence, and somewhere in the village, a smith would hammer something unreasonably loud for the hour. And just like that, the world would be awake again. With the world would come new guests. The inn's door would open, and a farmer would step in, dragging a sack of something possibly vegetable. Behind him, a woman with a travel cloak and the polite smile of someone about to complain about prices. And naturally, a knight with a dented helmet and no indoor voice. Nods would be exchanged, coins would change hands, questions would be asked, and answers would be vague. The cycle would begin again. The innkeeper would take a sip, Marjorie would retea her apron, a chair would be righted, a mug filled. A stranger would sit down and immediately ask if there was a vegan option. The inn would not change much. The stew would remain mysterious, the guests unpredictable, and the goat, one suspected, had a spare key. The narrative's deliberate return to the morning routine, mirroring the innkeeper's awakening, emphasizes the cyclical and repetitive nature of medieval life. This is not merely a stylistic choice. It reflects the pre-industrial rhythm dictated by natural light, recurring human needs, and the constant flow of travellers. The inn, despite its inherent chaos and discomforts, remains a constant, essential hub, a predictable anchor in an unpredictable world. The innkeeper's resigned optimism, well, that wasn't too bad, encapsulates this enduring resilience and the acceptance of daily challenges as part of life. This cyclical presentation provides a comforting, predictable rhythm for a sleep story, while also highlighting the fundamental stability and necessity of such establishments in medieval society. It reinforces the theme of human adaptation to challenging conditions and the persistence of essential services. Despite the noise, the mess, and the deeply suspicious smells, guests would always come back. This enduring appeal points to a deeper human need for community, shelter, and a temporary reprieve from the harshness of the outside world. The inn, with its unique blend of warmth, chaos, and shared experience, offered a space where social norms might be slightly relaxed, and a diverse group of people could find common ground, however fleeting. The humorous observation that it was the only place in town where your mistakes get swept up with the crumbs, and nobody asks questions before breakfast, encapsulates this sense of acceptance and non-judgment. This offers a profound and comforting concluding idea about the enduring appeal and social function of the medieval inn. It transforms its apparent discomforts into a unique form of comfort and connection, providing a warm, reflective ending suitable for a sleep story that emphasizes human resilience and the universal search for belonging. Living in a real medieval inn was an immersive, multi-sensory experience, far removed from modern notions of comfort and privacy. It was a world defined by communal living, resourcefulness, and a remarkable tolerance for chaos. From the pungent aromas of stale ale and simmering pottage to the symphony of snoring and the constant rustle of straw, every moment was a testament to the raw, unfiltered reality of medieval existence. The innkeeper and barmaid, far from simple service providers, were central figures in the social and economic fabric of their communities, navigating a constant stream of diverse personalities and managing an establishment that served as a vital hub for trade, information, and human connection. Despite the pervasive discomforts, the lack of privacy, the ever-present pests, the rudimentary hygiene, the inn offered a unique form of sanctuary, a place where the weary traveller could find warmth, sustenance, and a sense of belonging, however fleeting. It was a microcosm of medieval society, a place where human resilience, adaptability, and the enduring need for connection shone brightly amidst the grit and grime of daily life. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with the Midnight Historian. If tonight's story helped you find calm, please consider subscribing to join us again under the stars. Leave a like or a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and let the echoes of the past lull you into peace.